This is the 80s Show on iHeartRadio.
Let's go. Say ho, say ho, whoa, ho, whoa. Let's start the show. Let's start the show. Let's start the show. Let's start the show.
So, 29 years ago, today, in 1985, Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's career record with his 4,000th, he got 4,192 base hits off of Eric Show of the San Diego Padres. 20 years ago, in 1994, Jessica Tandy died of ovarian cancer at the age of 85. That was today. 40 years ago today, in 1974, Little House on the Prairie debuted on TV. Michael Landon, Melissa Gilbert. "43 years ago, in 1971, the Tito Jackson and the Jackson 5 cartoon show debuted on ABC, featuring the Jacksons and their pets, 2 rats named Ray and Charles, and a snake named Rosie the Crusher. True. 167 years ago today, in 1847, "Oh, Susanna" was sung for the first time in public, written by Stephen Foster, who, by the way, was an absolute cracker. He was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he visited the South a whopping total of once. He went to the South once, but he learned all he needed to know about the South in that one visit and wrote "Oh, Susanna" and "Camptown Races." 13 years ago, in 2001, I woke up and I looked out my window and saw a plume of smoke in New York City and turned on the TV just in time to see the Twin Towers go down. 13 years ago, in 2001, at 8:46 a.m. and 9:03 a.m., 2 hijacked planes were crashed into the World Trade Center. 2 other suicide flights crashed at the Pentagon and in the woods of Pennsylvania. A total of 2,792 people died in the World Trade Center attacks, and today we honor their memory.
If you like what you're hearing, tweet the show at ADSXE. AD on iHeartRadio.
I do what I want, when I want, how I want. Yeah, I do what I want, when I want, how I want. This is my United States of whatever. Picture me giving a damn, I said never. Yeah, I do what I want, when I want, how I want. Every day you're going and working, running that.
I don't know about you, but I'm not a real bleeding heart. I'm not a hippie. I had hippie parents, and when you have parents, you tend to rebel against them. Doesn't matter what they're telling you to do. You want to do the opposite. It's just something that happens when you hit about 13 years old. And for me, rebelling against my parents meant being the furthest from a hippie that I possibly could be. I moved to Texas, labeled myself a Republican. That would be the absolute antithesis of everything that my parents and their kind of respective families stood for. And while I wasn't a hippie, I did kind of grow up feeling that war, loss of life, those things were wrong. When at all possible, you should avoid killing folks. Alternative solutions to sending in troops, getting them killed, killing other people. That always seemed to be the move to me. As much as I rebelled against my parents' sort of hippie principles, it sort of stuck in my mind that killing people is bad. Going to war is bad. War is a good thing to stay away from. But living in New York City, seeing what happened on 9/11, looking out my window, seeing plumes of smoke, turning on the TV just in time to catch the Twin Towers go down. Being directly affected by the loss of innocent lives after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. I had a slightly different take on the situation than my usual war is a lousy idea default, which was, well, okay. With Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked a military installation. They killed soldiers, people that had signed up for the possibility, the eventuality of dying. And it was such a heinous thing, the way it was carried out in Pearl Harbor, that it spurred the U.S. to drop bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, obliterating 2 cities effectively and ending the war. The number of people killed, significantly smaller than in 9/11. And the type of people, while the loss of life is tragic, were people that had signed up for the eventuality of paying the ultimate sacrifice by joining our military. The innocent lives that were lost in the Twin Towers, these weren't soldiers, these weren't people that had signed up for conflict. These were not people who had bravely stood up and said, you know what, I'll die to protect other people if necessary. They were innocents that had nothing to do with anything with regard to any kind of conflict, military or otherwise, really. And the loss of life and the tragedy is tremendous. Still to this day, the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I hope the strangest thing I ever will. It was just otherworldly to be in New York City at the time. But the retribution didn't come. After it happened, as much as I default to the war, what is it good for way of thinking a lot of the time, I was like, well, if we did this after Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I'm just assuming that Afghanistan is bad and is harboring these people, so we're clearly going to wipe the entire country off the map and start over again. We're going to go in, we're going to turn sand to glass and clean slate that whole situation. But it didn't happen. It did not. And I remember feeling cheated, and I remember feeling regretful, and I remember feeling powerless in the face of terror. New York City was a scary place to be. All of America was a scary place to be at that time. Not only had there been a tremendous loss of life because of this act of terror, and as we all know, the repercussions, well, there were aftershocks for years and years after. Still are. But the retribution, not there. We were terrorized and we felt helpless and we felt like our government was doing nothing to avenge those that lost their lives. Nothing. And I don't know about you, but after hearing Obama's speech on ISIL, whatever you want to call it, I feel as though there was actual trepidation among people I know, especially people in New York, going, oh, we're coming up on the anniversary of September 11th. This ISIL thing, this is not good. There's 11 missing commercial jets. This is very uncomfortable. People have been affected. People are worried. People have been terrorized. It's much more than the taking of life. It's the affecting of the way of our lives in America. And I did feel that same sense of helplessness that same sense of terror after watching Obama's speech last night. We're going to carry out limited drone strikes, limited airstrikes. He's going to lead a coalition to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL. And that's all well, and that's all good. But on the anniversary of September 11th, what I wanted to hear my president say was, this is not okay. We're going to go in. I'm giving our military leaders 7 days. I'm taking nuclear weapons off the table, and I'm saying we're going to give them everything we've got. They will understand. We outspend everyone in the world with regard to our military. It's time we flex that muscle. This is what we've been stockpiling for. This is why your taxes are so high. This is how we are going to protect you. This is how we're going to protect America. We're going to go in. We're going to turn sand to glass. There will be no nation building, but they will not mess with us for at least the next 30 years. We will wipe them from the face of the map. We will wipe them from the face of humanity. We will take out the entire generation, and we'll be okay until the next generation grows up. It's not what he said, though. There was very little that I felt I could take comfort in that speech last night. So instead, I choose today to take comfort in the most powerful words that I think I've ever heard spoken by a politician. Rudy Giuliani, mayor of New York City at the time, said, "The attacks of September 11th were intended to break our spirit. Instead, we have emerged stronger and more unified. We feel renewed devotion to the principles of political, economic, and religious freedom, the rule of law, and respect for human life. We are more determined than ever to live our lives in freedom." All right, then. I'm sorry. Oh, God. A lot of people are just like, it's all been said about 9/11. We're not going to talk about that today on the show. And, maybe I'm a New Yorker. Maybe I lived through it. Maybe it's more important and significant to me. And maybe I have a distorted perspective on it. I actually heard someone tell me to let it go last year when we were talking about it. And I'm sorry, I can't. I'll never be able to. Every September 11th, I will weep. Can't help but happen. I will shed tears. Whether I want to or not. Whether I'm just trying to feel the feelings. In remembrance of the people that lost their lives. Or whether it catches me off guard. And I'm for a second transported back to what it was like. But in my entire lifetime, should I have children and should they have children, I will always pass along the horror that was that day and how we must never forget and how we must honor those that we lost. And how in darkness we eventually found some brightness. Today in the show, 49ers play-by-play guy was suspended for a couple of games after making some Janae Rice remarks. Roger Goodell making money hand over fist. The commissioner of the NFL. Yeah, he's doing perfectly all right for himself. There's protests and arrests in Ferguson. They're saying the whole nation is going to riot. Really? We haven't managed to